He is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, inventor, serial entrepreneur, and the founder and CEO of Simpleology, a web app that helps people free up their time and simplify their life. Let's all welcome Mr. Mark Joyner. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Eleanor, I'm great. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Could you please give us a brief background about yourself your and how your book and app Simpleology came about?
Well, background about myself is quite a complicated, long story. I'll give you sort of a short version of that. So, I grew up in a very poor family. We didn't have much. Good days were when we had 5 for $1 pot pies with government cheese. You may not know what that is in the Philippines, but that's kind of like what the poorest folks eat out in the States. Those were good days. On bad days, we didn't eat too well. I eventually joined the military and had a good career there. That sort of turned my life around a little bit. It gave me a good dose of discipline that I needed. And while I was in the military, I started getting involved in doing online business. And this was back in the days when online business didn't really exist. So, I played sort of a pioneering role in some of that. I invented certain technologies that are in use today. For example, my company invented the tracking pixel back in the day. That's something that, all the entrepreneurs are using now, with their advertising. I started the first ebook publishing company. I started the first ad tracking company. I started the first viral traffic building system back in the day. And then I got to a point where it was all overwhelming because, I didn't really have any formal business experience or experience with marketing. And I didn't know how to deal with all the stress, 80 employees and customers all over the world. It just got to be too much. So I decided to sell off all the business interests that we had. Or shut them down. And, I did that, with different divisions of the company. And then I started consulting for people behind the scenes. And what I discovered was that people were coming to me for marketing advice, but that's not what they needed. What they really needed was they needed to fix their productivity more often than not. They had great marketing ideas. They just weren't acting on it, right? So that was the genesis of Simpleology. I had to ask myself, well, what do I do on days when I have a great day? And what do I do on days when I'm having a terrible day? Is there a way that I can reverse engineer that so that I can take myself through processes so I'm having highly productive, highly motivated days, day in and day out consistently? And Simpleology started out as a sort of a pen and paper system for managing your life. And then it evolved into the software that it is now. And 15 years later, it's going strong. And we've got over 1 million users and it's going great.
Wow, that's so awesome. You're a very busy person. What do you do to manage stress?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, the first thing I do is the software that we use, ironically, it dovetails right into your question. If you're managing your life with Simpleology, your stress levels are going to go down naturally. Why? We have a tool called the dream catcher, right? So every time you have a thought, an idea, or to do comes to mind, you dump it in the dream catcher and then you process it through this process that we have called Start My Day. And it helps you make intelligent decisions about those things. Now, how does that lower stress? Well, we have this very, very well-studied phenomenon of cognitive science called the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. What that means is that in conscious memory, we can only process about 7 bits of data. Now, plus or minus 2 means that some people can only process about 5 and some up to 9. And that's, within, 1 or 2 standard deviations. Most people fall within that range of 5 to 9. So when we have all of these things floating around in our head and they start to add up, if we don't do something with those things, it starts to manifest in the form of stress. It is one of the ways that people are stressed out. And in fact, you'll probably notice this in your own personal behavior, right? Have you ever had a problem with a family member or lover, boyfriend, husband, whatever, right? And it was an argument and the argument was not resolved. And have you noticed how that affects your behavior up until the point where you resolve it?
Yes.
Right? It's a pretty common phenomenon, right? I mean, everybody goes through this. Every human being alive can relate to that. This is why we have to go get closure, right? If we don't get closure, the stress level is very, very high. Our mental resources are focused on solving the problem. We're running the story in our head over and over again. Why did they say that to me? Why Did they do this? Whatever the problem was. And up until that point, because our mental resources are focused on the problem, we don't have enough mental resources to bring to the work that we have at hand in front of us. So what happens? That manifests in the form of stress because our performance is so low. So the dream catcher dumps that information out of your mind. It sends a signal to the brain. Hey, next time you do start my day, we're going to process this stuff. So don't worry about it. It allows you to actually unload it. It gives you closure, gives you temporary closure until you can process. Now that's the first thing that I would recommend. The next thing is that I would recommend people learn how to stimulate their parasympathetic nervous system. So a lot of people aren't aware that, there's, of the autonomic nervous system, we can break it down into two different areas, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now the autonomic nervous system is all to do with the things that your body does automatically. So as I'm moving my hands as I talk to you right now, and as I move my mouth, that is all voluntary, right? But the autonomic nervous system is processing things in the background for me. So for example, my heart is beating. I don't have to think about that. It just does it, right? All of the cells in my body are doing, millions upon billions of processes that I am not aware of. That's all handled through the autonomic nervous system. Now, a lot of people aren't aware that our current understanding of the autonomic nervous system is that we can split it into two areas, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system is all about fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system is all about rest and digest, right? So if we're spending all of our time in fight or flight mode and we're not spending any time in rest and digest mode, what happens? Well, we start to have digestive problems. Where our body cannot recuperate properly, right? And these recuperative processes are essential for us in every part of our body. To heal from physical exercise, obviously we need to recuperate. To organize the mind, we need sleep. We don't really understand what sleeping and dreaming is for yet completely, but one of the notions that we have is that dreaming is this essential part of life that sort of organizes your memories in a certain way. And if you don't get that, if you don't allow your body to rest and recuperate in that way, it can manifest in the form of mental illness. In fact, there was a man who stayed up for 2 weeks straight as it's sort of a publicity stunt. And he was never the same after that. He had permanent neurological damage as a result. So most of us today, we don't know how to recuperate. And so, what we think is recuperation is us sitting in front of the TV and then, stuffing food in our face, right? And we all do this, right? But here's the problem with it. Well, one is, sitting still, especially in the chairs that we're sitting in these days, is not a very healthy thing. The body needs movement to recover as well. It's one of the paradoxical things. We think that just lying still is the best thing for us. Sometimes we need a bit of that, right? But we also need movement. So when people are sitting in front of the TV and they're sitting still for hours upon hours, binge watching something, for example, and then they're eating junk food, it's this whole cascade effect of negative things that we're doing to the body. So not only are we putting food that's toxic for our system into it, not only are we not moving and not allowing our body to pump the lymphatic fluids. It's something, by the way, a lot of people don't know, which is very, very deeply tied into stress, is that the lymphatic system does not have a pump. The way you pump the lymphatic system is through movement. It's the only way the lymph moves in the body. Now there's lymphatic drainage massage and things like that you can do, but you don't need it if you're actually physically moving your body. Your body knows how to pump the lymph itself, but you have to move. And then when we're watching TV, we're watching stuff that's getting us emotionally engaged a lot of the time. So for example, a lot of these dramas that we watch, or a lot of the horror movies, are forcing us to relive stressful elements in our lives. So it's actually a very counter to recovery system that most of us are involved in. So what should we do instead? Well, one is we shouldn't be exposing ourselves to stuff that is going to manifest in the form of additional stress in our bodies. I don't watch horror movies at all anymore. I used to when I was a kid. In fact, I try to minimize my consumption of all of these things as much as possible, because I know that most of them are not designed for us to be healthy. And instead, I'll try to put information in my mind that's going to have a positive effect on me. I'll listen to a book on tape that's going to uplift me, that's going to teach me something to be stronger, to improve my life. And I'll be, engaged in movement as I do that often. And I also use methods to directly stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. So for example, many people are not aware that if you certain types of breath can actually stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. It's a very interesting thing. There's a hack that allows us to control the autonomic nervous system.
Oh.
And the gateway for that is breath, because it's the only process that we're aware of in our bodies that we can control consciously and also unconsciously. So by manipulating our breath, we can actually stimulate the autonomic nervous system in many, many interesting ways, one of which being stimulation of the parasympathetic nervous system. So when I'm feeling stressed, I will do what's called 4-8 breathing, because when you breathe in, you're stimulating the sympathetic nervous system, and when you breathe out, you're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you breathe in for 4 into your nose, into your belly, and then out for 8 through the nose, through the belly, and then you keep repeating that, the inevitable outcome is that your parasympathetic nervous system will be stimulated, and that your reaction to stress is going to be greatly reduced. You'll notice a very huge relief in your experience of stress.
Wow, those are such valuable tips. Could you please share some of your productivity hacks using Simpleology formula?
Sure. Well, the most foundational one is the stuff I was telling you about with the dream catcher and using Start My Day, right? Because Start My Day is a process. It's more or less of a decision engine, right? It forces you to make decisions about the stuff that you're doing. And it helps you make intelligent decisions about the stuff that you're doing. See, now most of us have these to-do lists, right? And a to-do list, in my estimation, is the worst possible productivity tool ever invented. Why? Because on the same list, we've got take out the trash and solve world peace, right? We're never going to finish that list. It's going to go on forever. And because of that, we start to send negative reinforcement to the brain. We're telling the brain, hey, productivity equals pain. Every time you look at that to-do list, you're experiencing pain. You don't want to look at it anymore. So what do? We get involved in those avoidance behaviors. We start binge watching stuff, right? We start getting on social media, right? Instead of facing the stuff that we have to do. So Simpleology flips that whole paradigm up. The first thing it does, it asks you, well, what are the things that you're moving toward? So for you right now, you're preparing, podcasts and books and all these wonderful things, right? So if you were using Simpleology to do this, it would tell you as you use Simpleology, it will say, okay, here are the things that you're focused on. Here are the major targets that you're focused on in your life. Of all the things that you're considering doing today, which of them are going to move you closer to that? So then you start making decisions. So one of the later steps of Simpleology, we have a step called decide. And you get to do things like, okay, this is something that I need to schedule for the future. Or this is something that I'm going to move to a list, of like ideas I might act on later. We have all sorts of lists that you can create. You can modify inside Simpleology, are totally customizable. Or you might delegate it to somebody, right? Which I hope, all of us are getting to a point where we have people we can delegate things to. As entrepreneurs, we need this, right? It's absolutely essential. And if you don't have that, it's one of the very first things that you need to do. It's one of the most intelligent expenses you can engage in. And then, at the end of that process, you have a list of stuff that you're actually going to do today. And then you can start prioritizing those things. And the priority method that we recommend is a system called HIME. It's a Simpleology neologism, an acronym it stands for high impact, minimal effort. So if you think of it this way, of the universe of possibilities, of all of the things that you could do, should you be focusing on the stuff that's high impact but high effort? Well, maybe that's the Pareto answer, right? It says always, focus on the stuff that's going to give you the high impact, right? But if it's high effort, are there better alternatives? Let's look. Well, what if we do stuff that's low impact, high effort? Now, clearly that's not a good idea, right? If it's something that's really hard, but it's not going to, have much impact on your life, why would you do it? Why would you spend your time on this? Now, if you've got stuff that's low impact and low effort, well, maybe that's not going to help things out too much either, right? Maybe, that's what Facebook is. Maybe that's what YouTube is, right? It's all the low impact, low effort stuff that we're spending our time on. Now, what if instead we did stuff that was high impact but low effort? That stuff exists. It totally exists. And what we have inside Simpleology is we have tools to help you sort through those things. What you can do is you can score all of your potential items that you're going to be acting on impact and ease. And then you multiply the numbers together. So if something is high impact, it would be on a scale of 1 to 10, it would be 10. If it were low impact, it would be a 1. If something were very easy, it would be a 10. If it were very hard, it would be a 1 on the ease scale. And then when you multiply these numbers together, you get what we call a Jaime score. Now, it turns out that the stuff with the highest Jaime score is almost always the most intelligent stuff to act on. So that is the base foundation of what Simpleology does for productivity. Of course, there's much, much more, but that's what we get people to understand in the very beginning, because that's the stuff that's going to solve the most Jaime chunk of their productivity problems.
Those are such valuable tips. Kindly share your upcoming projects or events. Do you have any upcoming projects or events, or where can people find you?
Well, right now, we're working on a new version of Simpleology. And if people go to the Simpleology blog, which is at simpleology.com/blog, they can see the different things that we're releasing there. And in fact, right now on the blog, as you and I record this, we are getting ready to launch 5.9, and there's a little teaser there getting people to start thinking about what 5.9 is going to do for them. So that's always where the latest and greatest stuff in Simpleology is happening. I'm active on my Facebook as well, but the Simpleology blog is probably the best place for folks to go to find out what's new and what's on the road ahead.
That was an awesome interview, Mark. Thank you so much for sharing those helpful tips, and more power to you.
More power to you too.
Thank you.